Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Brett L. Pape. That's Coach Bruce, and this is the Coach Approach. What is up? How's it going? Coach Bruce, always good to see you, brother. How you doing?
Cheers, my brother. I'm doing well, man.
Here we are. Somehow, some way, we got back to today.
That's right, man. It's been a crazy week, but we're here. We're ready to rock. Let's get this thing going, man. Super excited for Sam Wallace coming on later tonight. We'll talk about that. If you guys have followed us on Twitter, you know, and you're kind of hopefully keeping track of what guests, what analysts we've got coming on. But super excited for today's show, and could be happier to be on, man.
I'm a fan of that guy, and I'm not like you. I do not have a relationship with him other than, I follow him on Twitter. That's about it. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to kind of pick his brain because, man, I have nothing but respect for that man's grind.
Yeah, we could do a whole show on Sam Wallace and what I think he means to the fantasy football community, man. He's one of very few people that I would tell you that I would trust to watch my kids if having never really. Well, I've met the guy now because I met him at the expo, but even prior to that, he's probably one of those guys would have been like, I would trust that guy with anything, man. He's such a great guy. Looking forward to talking to him.
Absolutely. Aside from that, everything else going well?
Yeah, man, everything's good. We've got some fun and exciting stuff happening in the NFL right now. We're getting towards, hopefully week 1. We've got, week 3 in the preseason for most, week 4 for Cowboys and Tampa Bay as they play 4 games in this preseason. But now that things are starting to wind down and positions are starting to take place, and I can't wait for September 9th, Thursday night, with the opening game, man.
Today was another big one for you. I saw a release that you had today, and I know you don't like to talk much about it because this is about the podcast. But at the same time, man, really respecting the work that you're doing with the Project 32, and love the story that was shared today.
No, I mean, Jesse was fantastic when we first put this out, and we were looking for analysts and fans of those, respected teams, those 32 teams. He was one of the first guys that DM'd me and said, "Hey, man, I would love to, represent the Seahawks." And that's and it's funny, as a Cowboys fan and an NFC guy, it's like Seahawks are probably my least favorite next to the Eagles when it comes to teams that are fans that I always kind of get into beefs with. But I love everybody, man. But when he said he was with the Seahawks, I was like, man, couldn't you have picked a different team? But no, his story is phenomenal, and his video. And he asked, hey, would you guys mind if I, put a video together and just, kind of speak that way versus, writing something up? And I'm like, man, that would be fantastic. Absolutely. Right. So he was all over it, man.
Yeah, that was awesome. And quickly, though, I'm curious because I think they're going to be a fun team to look at fantasy-wise. What were some of the things about the Seahawks that you found while putting this together?
Well, I think what's neat is what they're going to do offensively with Waldron and Russell Wilson, and what I think that offense is capable of doing. Whereas Russell Wilson's used to attacking the middle of the field and used to attacking outside the numbers and using DK, and he likes the vertical passing game. Whereas with the new offensive coordinator, he's more based on let's be more efficient, let's work middle of the field. And I think that's something that Russell Wilson and him are going to, and you're already seeing it now. I mean, I think he's already a guy that can, complete a very high percentage of passes, but you're going to take less risks like maybe they did, the last 8 games of last season as the numbers dropped off. I'm just really excited about DK Metcalf now having another year under his belt, having a full offseason with Russell Wilson, what they're going to do offensively. I think Tyler Lockett, I think over 3 games was 50% of his production last year from a fantasy perspective. Right. A lot of weeks where people felt like he didn't show up. I think we'll see a lot more consistency there. I think having Chris Carson back in that lead role as the running back for a full season is going to be huge for that offense as well. I think it's going to open everything up. I don't like the Seahawks, but I love football and I love what they're doing offensively. And so I'm more of a fan of the game than I am of a specific team. But I'm really excited, especially from a fantasy perspective, of what I think they can do in Seattle. And then adding Dwayne Eskridge as a guy to take the top off and help open some things up and what they're going to do at the tight end position. So I think there's going to be an exciting year. If you're a Seattle fan, it's a good time to be one. But, man, that is the toughest division in football. You've got 4 teams legitimately that could contend, for a playoff spot. So it's going to be a very difficult division, but I expect a lot of offense out of Seattle this year.
The one guy that was getting a lot of hub or a lot of talk was Gerald Everett. And seeing in drafts, it wasn't like his ADP wasn't all that great, meaning that you didn't take a lot to get him. What are your thoughts about him? And I didn't get him anywhere, but I just didn't see it.
Well, I think a lot of times we get caught up, or analysts get caught up in thinking about, you've got what have they done in the past, and so you can talk about redraft versus dynasty, but what have they done in the past versus what we project them to do in 2021. So purely from a redraft perspective, I think a lot of the concern was Gerald Everett was either splitting time with Tyler Higbee, it was Jared Cook. It seemed like he was always splitting time with somebody. Right. Now he's got an opportunity to be the number 1 tight end for the full 17-week season. And so I think, and you're in an offense with a guy like Russell Wilson, again, who if they allow him to cook, can absolutely cook. And there's going to be a lot of room for him to work in this offense. So I see Gerald Everett having potentially his best season, as an NFL tight end. I think there's huge upside there if he can stay healthy for a full 17. I like Gerald Everett, but he's not a sexy pick, and he's a guy you can still get at great value. Yeah. He's not a guy you have to pull. If you want to wait until the later rounds, he's going to be there. So
right. No, he was there. I just maybe still a round or 2 further than I was willing to go. But yeah,
I think that's it. I don't have him on a lot of teams either. I'm probably like you. I wait because I'm not. I think he's going to have potentially his best season, but I still don't. Maybe there's some of that what's happened in the past that kind of clouds my vision a little bit. But I do think if you really just break it down and look at the numbers and the offense he's in, there's going to be some opportunities for him for sure.
Good stuff. Good stuff. What about, we got a big news that came Monday. I don't know about you, as we talked about earlier, haven't been able to watch a lot of stuff. Haven't been able to do much with everything going on. Moved my daughter to your neck of the woods last week. She's at the University of Arizona now. So that was fun. That was an experience. But whatever.
I know. I'm going to answer you guys, but I get it.
But aside from that, I did get to see a little bit about Monday and Travis Etienne. First, he didn't play that much until, a little bit later than what most people wanted. But then that injury, that is brutal. It's just another what's been a rough preseason for a lot of fantasy owners who have got guys that are not going to be around for quite some time.
Last year was a lot of quad injuries, a lot of hamstring injuries, I think from a condensed offseason and guys trying to push it too quickly. This year, it's like everybody's playing footsies. This is the year of the foot. You've got another guy that suffered a foot injury, and a little different than Carson Wentz and Quentin Nelson with the Colts. Unfortunately, it's a grade 3, so he's out for the entire season. And, that's tough because he was drafted with, he's had experience with the quarterback there with Trevor Lawrence, but he's also a guy that you can line him in the slot, you can line him in the backfield, you can use him as a movement guy, just like they did with Laviska Shenault last year. I was really excited to see what they could do offensively. I think it's going to be a huge help for Trevor Lawrence in that offense. So it's very disappointing to see him go down. But, hey, if you have J-Rob, I hate when people take victory laps about an injury. I can't stand it. But, the reality is if you do have J-Rob, I don't think there's a lot of comments on Twitter sometimes where people go, hey, don't take victory laps over an injury. But at the same time, don't lack the ability to give acknowledgement for guys that do still have James Robinson or may have traded for him and felt like he was still going to have a role. Give him credit. They held on to him or traded for him and probably got good value for him, especially now that he's going to be the RB1. And look, you've got Carlos Hyde and you got a couple of guys that don't have a whole lot of touches in the NFL. So he's right back to where he was last year with Raquel Armstead opting out and where they're at in the off. He's the guy. But James Robinson is the guy. There's going to be a lot of volume in that offense now. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But, some other things, looks like Brett might be having some technical difficulties, but I'm sure we'll see him jump back on.
I hope I'm back.
Hey, man, I was about ready to just go.
Hey, it's all yours. That may happen. That may happen. I don't know. At some point, especially with you, looks like, and congratulations, you might be doing some work close to me at some point. I know you have the Southern California and you're all everywhere, but if you're ever out where I live, you'll see that we are out in the middle of nowhere. We're literally on the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains. So internet has been I had to teach with it for a year and a half, and it was awful because for 2 to 3 hours a day, I have to be available in Zoom meetings, and it was always going out. But back to James Robinson. Golly, he had such a great opportunity last year, and the opportunity that he got. If you look at the shares that he received last year, it's sickening. And Carlos Hyde is not somebody who really scares me away as far as breaking too much into his share load. And I think that I also do think that James Robinson was someone who was not going to be completely affected by the return by Travis Etienne. I still felt like he had good value anyways. And you're right. Now it's incredibly higher. And I think it's just sad for the organization, an organization that is trying to get, off to the right start. And this is not the best way to get it going.
No, I still had James Robinson getting the bulk of the carries. Obviously, Travis Etienne made a much bigger factor in the passing game. And the thing about Jacksonville and what they're trying to build offensively is you needed those movement guys you can use in motion, you can line up all over the field. And when you have Laviska Shenault and you have Travis Etienne, you can still use James Robinson as your primary back. It opens up a lot of things for DJ Shark. It opens up, things for that offense in terms of the passing game, what they can do in terms of play action. So I think it's from a full concept perspective, I think it's something that Urban Meyer and they're going to have to figure out because it's a big piece to take away. It is. I mean, just look at Clemson last year with Travis Etienne and just say, hey, and Clemson's an NFL team as an example. There's a lot of guys that come out of Clemson, not quite at Alabama level, Ohio State, but a lot of guys they put in the NFL. And you take a guy like that out of an offense in Clemson, he's a tough guy to replace, whether it's at the college level or at the NFL level. And, I do think Travis Etienne can play a big part in the passing game and in the movement area of the offense. But yeah, if anybody was selling J-Rob or didn't think J-Rob was still going to have a role, I think that was a mistake. He was absolutely going to have a role. And like I said, I still had him getting more touchdowns, more carries to the goal line, and still getting a lion's share of the carries. But Travis was certainly going to eat into some of that.
Yeah. And the best part, though, you brought up Shenault, and I think this does help him.
It does.
I think I do too. I think this is any type of screen game that they were going to involve Travis Etienne. That's a place where I wouldn't be surprised to see, Laviska getting some of those. Not that James Robinson was bad out of the backfield last year. He provided a lot of, he did a lot of great things out of the backfield last year. So he's going to still have a little role. But Laviska, I love what that guy has, the opportunities that he's going to get this year.
Every time Laviska touches the ball, there's an opportunity he's going to break a big play. And I think that's where, there's a lot of people on Twitter that talk about, is Marvin Jones going to play a bigger role? And what's DJ Shark and what's that offense going to look like? And Laviska might be the forgotten guy. And I've never felt that was going to be the case. I think what you're going to see is it affect his average depth of target because he is going to be used more in the screen game now because when you had Travis Etienne, and you had James Robinson and you have Laviska Shenault, you have a lot more flexibility in what you can call. Now it puts Laviska right back in that same Curtis Samuel role in that offense. And so he's going to be
you talk about that though. It was so nice to see him run a 9 route the other night and just stretch the field because they haven't utilized him in that capacity much. So I even tweeted out, God, it was nice to see it. Now they didn't complete the pass, but just give him the opportunity because he proved at Colorado he can do that.
No, I think that's what you want to put on film. We all know as ex-coaches and offensive guys that if you want a team and you've got a scrimmage against an opponent, you've got preseason games that other teams are going to look at when you're on their schedule. You're looking 3 games out. You're looking at Jacksonville and you're saying, okay, what have they done during the preseason? There's certain routes you have guys run that maybe they don't normally run, and so it makes that defense have to think again and go, hey, maybe Laviska's not a guy that's going to catch a 5-yard hitch or going to catch a quick screen or a slip screen or a tunnel screen, or he's not a guy that's going to run. They're going to use him in the vertical passing game. And when you can line him up in the slot and run a fade from the slot, against a third corner with no safety help, he's going to create some mismatches. So I'm still excited to see what he can do. I think his opportunity just got a little bit better with the injury to Etienne. Again, as much as I hate to see guys get injured, I would love it if all 32 teams could play with no injuries for an entire season. And that's how we do our projections, right? We do projections. Right. I don't take injuries into consideration. I don't believe guys are injury prone. I think some guys just don't have as much good luck as others. So, it's frustrating that, unfortunately, it does happen every offseason. We see major players, go down.
Yeah, it's Lord, do I know it, man. I even tweeted yesterday, still can't get over Cam Akers. That is going to be something that's going to stink for a while. But let's move on. Let's talk about Denver. They picked their quarterback today. They went the safe route, in my opinion, and they went with Teddy Bridgewater. I would not argue that they went with a guy that they feel like can legitimately get them a victory, and for that, I fault them not at all.
So, there's a lot of Denver fans, and Linda Lyons is one of my favorite follows on Twitter, and we're in a co-management team together. And, I didn't get a chance to get her feedback on the decision, but I know she was, more of a Drew Lock person, just as I was. At C. Williams NFL, who is the reason why we have this podcast from the cut. He's our first guest on our first podcast. He had a great tweet this afternoon that basically said, taking mediocrity over potential greatness certainly is a move. And that was his comment in response to them deciding to go with Teddy B, because you look at that and you go, okay, here's the route that we think the Broncos are probably taking. Is you're going to take a route where you're going to say, one, you're definitely done with Drew Lock. You've made a decision to move on from Drew Lock. So that's first and foremost. Unless Teddy B gets injured or plays absolutely terribly, which I don't think Teddy B will, with the weapons they have there, I think he'll do just enough to keep his job. So if he doesn't get hurt, he's your guy. So now you wasted a pick on Drew Lock. We can go back through Paxton Lynch and Brock Osweiler and Jay Cutler and all the guys they've drafted and quarterbacks they brought in, and it just hasn't worked out. It's like they just can't quite figure it out since Elway left, other than a short stint with Peyton Manning there. But it tells me that so Teddy B to me is a mid to low end QB2. He's a game manager that gives you low end touchdown production. Looking at the numbers, he finished 2020 with a 3% touchdown rate. So what that means is you take all of his attempts, and out of all those attempts, what percentage of throws were completed for touchdowns? 3%, which was 30th in the NFL last season. Okay, over the last decade, any quarterback with over 1,500 attempts, he is one of the worst quarterbacks when it comes to touchdown percentage. What you're going to get is guys like Cortland Sutton. Okay, he's now back from injury. It's going to affect him. The guys that it helps is KJ Hamler, Noah Fant, Jerry Jeudy, the guys that work underneath. But what's frustrating about the decision is you're basically saying, hey, we're going to play our defense, which is the strength of our football team. Okay, we're going to use them to flip field, create turnovers. We're going to have Teddy B as a game manager. We're going to make sure that we're going to be in every game going into the fourth quarter. We're not going to take a whole lot of chances. And we're going to hope that Teddy B does not turn the ball over and does just enough on offense to win games. At the end of the day, you can say defense wins championships, but last time I checked, the team with the most points wins. And in today's NFL, if you're not able to score points and you're not able to come from behind and you can't put 20 points up quick when you're down 24 in the second half of a playoff game, Teddy B is not your guy. But that's the decision they have made, so they've committed to who they are. And you look at last year and the 3% touchdown rate. By the way, it's 3.4 for his career, so it's not just last year. But you take last year, you had DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel. Okay, Mike Davis filled in well for Christian McCaffrey, although I understand it's not Christian McCaffrey. With those three receivers, you still ended up with only a 3% touchdown rate. For comparison, last year Aaron Rodgers led the NFL at 9.1%.
This is
it's amazing. That's the decision.
To me, this isn't a Teddy won the job. This was a Drew Lock proof that he can never have the job. And that's the unfortunate part, because not only did they give up on any type of ability to be more explosive when they went with the Teddy Bridgewater, but they also gave up on a guy named, Justin Fields. They must have thought that Drew Lock was going to maybe turn out to something to feel okay enough to pass on Justin Fields when they could have took him, because Teddy Bridgewater is not your franchise quarterback.
No, he's not. He's not even close. But look, this isn't about knocking Teddy B. It's kind of like you said. Apparently, Drew Lock didn't do enough to win it. I don't know that Teddy B earned it. I think Drew Lock did enough to not earn it. And I think that's probably that's a great way of putting it. I love that. But I just think you're so reliant now upon Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler and Javonte Williams being able to take receptions and turn them into bigger plays. Your yak ability becomes huge. Now, I do believe Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler, when given space on whip routes, option routes, what they can do underneath, think of Julian Edelman, think of Cole Beasley, think of guys like that, what they can do underneath. Yeah, there's going to be some opportunities there to run in space, but at the same time, what is the defense going to do? We're going to allow you to catch the ball underneath. We're going to come up. We're going to make a tackle. We're going to have to get 3 downs to get a first down. Yeah. So it definitely helps out Javonte Williams. It definitely helps out, Melvin Gordon. It helps the run game because they're not going to throw as much in the red zone. They're going to hand the ball off, and they're going to try to, dominate you, take some time off the clock, and keep the offense off the field and manage the game and, hope to sneak into the playoffs.
I agree. And it's probably better for the team, though. Obviously, if they made this decision, and with it, if he can manage the game, if he can matriculate the ball down the field, and that defense is what everyone's talking about, that defense is going to be, they're going to be a tough team. But I think we should stop because anytime we get somebody who pops on and a little bit early, especially with the guest that we have this week, we should probably get right to him, and I certainly have enough questions for him. Coach Bruce, why don't you tell about our guy tonight?
No, absolutely. I am super excited about having this guy on. Sam Wallace, I'll tell you a little story first. He's a gentleman that last season, off season, he was a guy, an analyst that I would reach out to in his DMs and ask him his view on fantasy football. I love his takes. I love the articles he puts out. He just was a genuine guy. He backed everything up with great content. So he was a guy that I always felt comfortable reaching out to. And he's outstanding what he does in this community. I know there's a ton of people that look up to him, but he's a husband. He's a father. He's a teacher. He's a fantasy consultant. I had the privilege of taking advantage of his coffee talk last year, although for me it was bourbon. I think I was sipping bourbon that day. But and got 30 minutes with him on a call, or 15, I don't remember what it was, and got a chance to just talk fantasy football with him and his process, and absolutely loved it. He's a track coach. He just finished his master's degree. I think he wrote 100 articles for RotoViz last year, 150. I don't know what it was. Seemed like he was getting something out. I don't know how he finds the time, but he does porch takes. Again, he's doing consulting work now. He's a dynasty writer for RotoViz, and he's also a participant in the Scott Fish Bowl. I know he did it last year. He's doing it again this year. So without further ado, you can find him at @SWallace_FF. Sam Wallace, man, how are you?
Man, I am doing fantastic. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great, man. I couldn't help it, man. I felt like I had to go through the whole gamut, man. I think everybody knows who you are, but for those that don't, if there's anybody that watches this podcast or is viewing it now, hopefully, they get a chance to find out a little bit more about you and where they can find you, man. What are you up to now, man? What's going on?
Well, thank you so much for not only having, given me the opportunity to jump on here with you guys for a little bit, but for the kind introduction. It was very, very humbling. Thank you sincerely. And being able to connect with so many people in this space has always been just so cool. Even at the expo a couple of weeks ago, for those who were able to make the trip out to Canton, Ohio, it was like Twitter came to life, which was so cool. Yeah. It was awesome. I mean, all these people that I've gotten to know, such as yourself, and chatted with over the years. I mean, it's been a couple of years. We kind of had like that gap year, it feels like, with COVID, where nobody really did or saw anybody. But it's very, very cool. For me personally, I'm a high school teacher. Today was our first day back for teacher in service. So I don't have any kids yet until next week. Wednesday is the kids' first day. But it was my first day back in the classroom coming out of the summer, which is all right. It was fun. I'm looking forward to getting back into the swing of things for the school year. Love my job. Love the opportunity that I get with high school students. But it's going to be a different routine now for me. I'm used to having a little bit more free time in the summer, but looking forward to getting back.
Sam, I'm like you. I'm a teacher, but I'm 27 years into it. And we got back 3 weeks ago. So it's different after going through everything that we went through with COVID, and to have somewhat of a sense of normalcy now. It's nice. And I just hope that we can continue to do this and not have to revert back to some of the ways we had to do it during COVID. But aside from that, I'm like one of those phone callers to a radio show that's never called, but I've been a longtime follower. Big fan. One of the things that when you're going to come across a Sam Wallace tweet is that you're going to learn something. And it's always been something that has attracted me to your content. And with that being said, one of the questions because I come out and say, I just want to be better at the game. I say it every week. There'll be a week where I won't say it finally, and everyone will say thank you. But until then, I'm just someone who wants to get better. And I'm looking for people who are like me, that were once strictly managers, or however you want to put it, and now they're analysts. So how did that process come from you? And was it your desire just to get better that made you start looking into your own avenues as far as research?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because I always kind of, not that I'm uncomfortable with the term analyst, because I don't do this full time. This isn't my job. I'm really fortunate to have the opportunities that I do with RotoViz, and for how welcoming everyone in the Twitter community has been for me over the last few years. I sometimes feel like there's this stigma sometimes when someone labels themselves as an analyst, or someone describes someone as an analyst, that there's this level of knowledge that you should have or bring to the table. For me, I think I just took the time. And like you said, I just wanted to be better. I wanted more. That's kind of why I got involved with Twitter, is I just wanted more interaction. I wanted to be around people who shared the same passion that I do, and who just love this fake, crazy game of fantasy football as much as we all do. And it just kind of led me to exploring more research. Like yourself, being an educator, there's this feeling of wanting to be a learner, and something we obviously try to impress upon our students of never stop learning. Always be looking to find something new, always be looking to grow and improve yourself. So for me, for fantasy football, it was kind of just a natural progression of, I know enough to play in home leagues, but how can I get better? And I'm a natural competitor. So whatever way I could find to find an edge over my league mates was great. Just kind of expanding my own knowledge, and those endeavors, if you will, kind of led me to some unique opportunities that I never thought I would have. When I first started, never really knew I wanted. I never planned on writing articles. I never really knew I liked writing. I mean, I wrote research papers for college and grad school, but that's the extent. I don't have an English background. I don't have a journalism background. It's just something I enjoyed doing for myself that some people found value in, and I'm just extremely fortunate to be able to share kind of my time and effort with a lot of other people.
You were talking about your writing style, and I'm a former editor with Dynasty Nerds, and now I'm with Ball Blast, and one of the things that I like about your writing style is that it's very concise. It's like, I was telling this to Bruce earlier. It's almost, you can tell you're a teacher. There's not a lot of fluff. You're just bam, 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 and I like that. As a consumer of information, you kind of want to just have it right there thrown in your face. You don't want to have to look for it, and that's something that I really appreciate about your writing style.
Thank you. And one thing I'm always trying to get better at too, and is being actionable, is being insightful. And there's so much written content out there. I mean, there's no qualifications for writing about fantasy football. I mean, if you want to write for a website, there's some qualifications, or somebody else's opinion that has to matter. But anybody can open up a Google Doc or a Word doc, write their thoughts down, and just post a link, post an article. There's nothing to it. So how do you sift through that? And how do you make it valuable for the reader? And that's something I always have to remind myself of. And it's almost always the first piece of advice I give to anybody who wants to do anything in this space is, why should people care? And it sounds kind of blunt, and it's not meant to be rude, but it's kind of meant to be a forceful question of, whatever effort you put out, why should someone care to read, to listen, to subscribe, to do something that makes your worthwhile? And that's tough as the fantasy football space gets more and more saturated, and it's never a bad thing. I talk about this a lot, and I never ever want to come across as someone who is gatekeeping, because I think everyone should have a path to sharing their thoughts, their insights, their creations of content, whatever it might be. But because there's so much, how do you make yours rise to the top, or how do you get yours in front of people in a way that says, hey, I like this person's style, their voice, the way they talk about things or write about things. And the opportunities I have with RotoViz is their wealth of tools, all the resources, all the apps that are built in. They're highly visual, and they're very manipulative, which is great. So for me, when I'm looking for pieces of data to either back up a point, or if I'm just kind of exploring an idea that I have to see if there's any data to back it up, I have the ability to say, okay, here's kind of like a little paragraph, but here, let me show you. Some people can just write and you can just read it and you know exactly what they mean, but being able to show people visually, whether it's a colored chart or a graph or something, I think that piece of actionable data is great. But then the final piece I always try to wrap up with, and it's something I'm still working on, is I can give you all of that really cool, flashy, colorful data, but if I don't tell you something to kind of wrap it all up and do something with it, it's like, hey, great, you told me this guy's a value. Cool. Like, that's fine. Now, what do I do with it? Like, what's a trade suggestion? What is something I can take from this article or podcast and actually apply it to my own leagues?
I think Sam brings up such a great point, too, going back to what you were saying earlier. I've interviewed a lot of top sales execs over the years, and what's interesting, it's almost like when you write an article, it's a written interview, because you don't have an opportunity to see somebody face-to-face like you would in a normal deal. There's so much saturation. There's so many podcasts, so many articles, so many, like you talked about. What is something that you're going to post on Twitter? And I'll say Twitter because that's where most of us have, got a relationship with you. What is it? What's the hook? What's going to get you to grab my attention? It's going to get me to want to pay for a site to read your article, right? There's a lot of people out there still looking for free information. And I'll tell you this, if you're willing to spend money to be in a money league, right, and you want to win that money, why would you not invest a small amount of money that is such a small percentage of what you spend in fantasy football every year to make you a much better player? And I can tell you this, articles that you write and the content that you put out, there's never a time that I walk away from it and I go, and I don't even know what he's talking about. Or, what am I supposed to do with this information? I feel like it is actionable, and you can take that information, you can take a look at the teams that you currently have, and you can find a way to apply that. And so I tip my hat to you, man. I think you figured that out. I think you figured out how to draw people in as someone that is paid to be on the Coffee Talk with you, man. It's so worth it. So I would tell anybody, like, if you get an opportunity to talk to Sam, man, do it. Read his articles, get on RotoViz. It's one of the best sites out there. There's a lot of great sites, but I feel like I'm doing your own infomercial for you. But
well, I appreciate it.
You walk away and you feel like you're a better fantasy football player or manager because of the information that you put out.
Thank you. And to your point, you said, what's the hook? And that's so difficult, I feel like, for a lot of people in the fantasy space, because there's such a fine line between a clickbait hot take article, but also something that, I want to grab your attention. So there's a line there, and people say, well, I've even had people kind of reach out to me and say, hey, your last couple articles, I felt kind of like clickbaity a little bit. Like the title is like, is so-and-so going to be the next Julio Jones? Is so-and-so going to be the next bust? I mean, and there's that element to that for sure. But at the same time, I don't want to be like, this player is boring but great. I mean, you don't want to be totally bland about it. And like,
right.
And that's
well,
tough.
You just recently did that. And the Calvin Ridley, the next Calvin Ridley, 9th round, Elijah Moore.
Yep.
I mean, that is one where a lot of people would probably be going, are you, come on, really? And obviously when you read it, you see why, but I see what you're saying. That would be
and that's
true.
that's such a great example of that article, because, and that I'm glad you brought that one up, because there is some clickbaitiness to it of like, okay, you're not going to find Calvin Ridley in the 9th round. Like, that's crazy. But if I'm going to have a title that's maybe a little bit more provocative in that sense, I want to make sure that whatever details I have are relevant enough to at least back that up. Where yes, it's my opinion for sure, but I still want to make sure that my process is good, and that my process really, not that it can't be questioned, but that I feel like if any objective person going in without any preconceived biases were to take the same steps, they could see, okay, I can see a realm of possibility where the outcome is this, that you got to. It's not so out of, so way out in left field where somebody says, well, how did you connect these two seemingly unrelated variables? Right. I mean, you want to be careful enough to not push people away to be like too out there, but enough where it's like, oh, that's interesting. I'm willing to click. I'm willing to, and that's what it is. So people say, well, I don't want to be clickbaity. I mean, I do in a sense, because I want people to read my stuff for sure. I mean, we all do. Nobody likes shouting into an empty void. We like having feedback. We like having content and traffic. It's just that balance of how you present yourself doing that. And is there substantial evidence to back it up?
I think with someone like you don't do it. You don't do it on Twitter. So when you do say something like that, man, I ran and went right to it because I'm thinking, let's go. Let's get into this. It's not, you're not crying wolf every time.
That's a good point. And yeah, thank you for saying that and for bringing that up, because I mean, you just get numb to it after a while. And there's people that we probably all follow a little bit where we're like, yeah, that guy or that gal. They kind of say things that maybe aren't super realistic all the time. You just kind of get numb to those things. But if somebody, maybe if there's a writer that I respect and I see, oh wow, they posted something like that, like you said, that would probably hook me a little bit more, because that might be a little bit outside of their normal style.
Well, I think that's a lot of what it is, right? Is not only are you trying to appeal to, like right now we're in redraft season, right? Like all the people that do redraft leagues or home leagues are typically drafting in the third or fourth week of the preseason. So they want to see how injuries play out. So this is that time where redraft rankings and redraft articles and where do you see people. Now the big buzz this year compared to the last 2 years I've been on Twitter is everybody's doing projections. Everybody wants to know, what does that look like and what does that mean? So it's easy now to take projections and say, okay, here's my redraft rankings because I've done all the projections for all 32 teams. Here's where we're at. But then people get caught up. They're shifting from redraft to dynasty and having to go, okay, so I can't think of a player necessarily in 2021. I've got to think 22, 23, 24, 2025. How does that change my draft strategy? And how do I input that information to help me understand how to be a better fantasy manager? And what's your process when it comes to that? Because I know this is that time of year, as well. A lot of us are trying to get people to go from redraft into dynasty. Like, what is your thought process there?
Yeah, that's tough for sure. Because I'm predominantly a dynasty player, and I'm predominantly a dynasty writer and content creator in that sense. So, I mean, the offseason is great for me because everything is speculation at that point and everything is long term. Nothing's going on yet. So for me, it's really difficult sometimes to shift my focus to the here and now. What I try to do is focus. I kind of let ADP drive a lot of my research, though. And I'll look at ADP from a couple of different places. A lot of what we have over at RotoViz is from FFPC. There's a lot of the data that we just have on hand readily available. A lot of best ball data, a lot of redraft data. We have our own RotoViz Triflex leagues that are going on. So, I mean, I have some of that information at my fingertips. I'll let some of that drive the discussion of, hey, here's some ADP disparities that I think shouldn't match. These veterans that can still produce at a high level are being heavily discounted, or we're seeing younger and younger NFL players produce earlier and earlier. It used to be like the year 3 breakout for wide receivers. The research heavily shows that it's year 2 for wide receivers. It just is. And the class of 2020 kind of spoiled us a little bit because we're like flush with talent now at wide receiver. Right. A lot of these young sophomore wideouts who I absolutely love, they're the ones that can produce in redraft. But again, it's that balance of, I think for me, one of the things I like too is my background in education. I have an economics background as well. So, what's that thought process applying it to fantasy football? Like, what's your opportunity cost? What is it going to cost you? I don't mind a player. You always hear, don't hate the player, hate the ADP. Like, everyone's draftable at a certain point, but a lot of the research I write about is, you can draft player X here, but you're giving up everything else in that range or in that round. And sometimes it's more important to look at who you're giving up as opposed to who you're actually drafting. Who are you giving up? Who's your next best choice? And you're going to have to kick down to the next round or something like that. And can you find similar value earlier or later? And a lot of it's based on your roster construction too. I mean, if you're in a heavy flex format where you can start 4, 5, 6 wide receivers, or are you in a pretty shallow starting lineup league? I mean, those decisions really impact the way you want to build your own roster moving forward.
I love this conversation right here because so much for me is the strategy part. That's what I need to learn. I would always just try and base everything off of just acquire the best players available and do whatever I have to do to do that. So now you're talking strategy. I really wanted to hit you up on this question, and that is that I hate that one of my favorite parts of the dynasty is the dynasty startup draft, and I hate it because every year I got to feed that need. And which just adds to more and more leagues. But aside from that, this year, my dynasty startup draft consisted of nothing but going for best available at every pick, strictly off of the rankings that I used. And I just was using it to do it as a way. You brought up roster construction. I didn't care about position so much. I just wanted to get the best players I could at each pick. So that's my question to you is, what is your startup dynasty draft strategy? What are you trying to do? Are you looking to build for now, or what are you doing?
Definitely.
That's a loaded question, right, Sam?
It is, and I love it because
Yeah.
I've been in dynasty leagues where guys will say, I don't really want to compete for 2 years. I'm going to sell everything. I'm going to accumulate as many future firsts as I can and dominate down the road. That's fine. Some people go veteran heavy. Some people go youth heavy. It's a balance for sure. I like trying to go young, but still able to compete. And it's a tight window sometimes because sometimes your young players might not be ready. Sometimes your older players aren't going to be valuable. I think the worst place you can get yourself as an owner is you have a roster that's imbalanced. Where sometimes people will say, well, I went with some young guys and I went with some old guys. I kind of got a mixed bag, and that's great. But then you have players that are maybe not peaking and players that are already after their peak, and then you just have this roster that isn't cohesive. You have these old guys that aren't peaking anymore. You have these young guys that maybe are peaking but aren't quite there yet, and your roster just doesn't match up. So I like to try to build it in layers if I can. And I wrote about this in a 3-part series for Redraft, actually, on wide receivers to target in rounds like 5 through 10. But I kind of worked in reverse. So I did rounds like 10 and 9, 8 and 7, and then 6 and 5. And in each of those tiers, there was a very distinct group of wide receivers that I preferred at each of those ADPs. You had like older veterans that had like pretty good ceilings if you just want to go for home run hits like late in the draft. And I looked at guys like Will Fuller, home run hitter, and then actually a rookie in Jalen Waddle. Another guy who could be another home run hitter. Same team. I looked at a couple of those players. Who can you find in that range of the draft that all you care about is upside? You've already kind of built the core of your roster. You want to look at some guys that maybe have more of a consistent floor that can maybe offer you some upside. Okay, players like Antonio Brown, probably going to get a good target share. Probably isn't going to single-handedly win you your league, but Buccaneers offense looks like it's going to be pretty good. Yeah. If you can get like a cheap piece of that offense, that's fine. And he's not far removed from having like the best 6-year run like ever in NFL history for fantasy football. And then, moving up a couple of rounds, getting into some of those really good like year 2 wide receivers, T. Higgins, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Ayuk, those types of players, building your team intentionally. And yeah, best player available is definitely a great strategy. I love it. Sometimes it depends on your league as well. People will say things like, well, I draft best player available, and then I'll worry about filling the holes with trades later on. If you know that your league isn't really going to be that active on the trades, don't put yourself in a corner where you're now dependent on your league mates to trade with you. And that was one of the things I talked about a lot when I did like one-on-one chats with people is I said, look, I can give you all the advice in the world that I think is relevant. It doesn't matter if you can't apply it to your league. I mean, I can tell you what I think you should do, but if your owners aren't going to trade with you, if they value players differently, if they value positional scarcity differently than you, it's going to be really challenging for you to balance out that roster. So I like trying to put the control in my own hands as much as I can in the draft, so I don't leave having to rely on someone else to fill a need that I didn't.
I think that's such a great, it's just, we could talk about this one topic for hours, but I think what's neat about this too is like I had a former football player that I used to coach that is like, hey, I've got the 11th pick and a 12-team PPR. What's your draft strategy? And it's so funny now because you ask, okay, is it redraft? Is it dynasty? What's the roster construction? What does the scoring system look like? There's so much information left out that we need, but it's neat to be able to take what you're saying and apply it, because you can talk about there's and I use the term ageist, right? Where there's rankings that come out that someone will say, hey, I'm taking this player over this player. Well, why are you taking him? Well, he's only 23. The other guy's 26. Well, if he plays wide receiver in a great offense, I'm not worried about that wide receiver at 26. If he's better than the guy at 23, I'm looking at the next 3 to 4 year window. I'm okay taking the guy that's 26 years old that's already proven. So I think sometimes it just depends on, again, like you said, what is your roster construction? People say you don't win leagues in drafts, you win them through trades and free agency. But again, to your point, which is what's great, I think my biggest takeaway from that is if people aren't active in your league, you're making an assumption that you're going to be able to pull off trades that you don't know if you're going to be able to pull off or not.
Yeah, you don't want to be the one left holding the bag for sure.
Right.
If you're going into a league that you know is going to be pretty trade happy, or you have good relationships with a lot of the owners, it's a long-term league or whatever, that's great. I mean, if it's a random league on Twitter that you joined with a bunch of other people that you've never met and no one knows each other, I mean, that's awesome. That's really cool. But those relationships matter. A lot of that game theory that goes into, especially Dynasty, and I think that's why I like Dynasty so much, is I often find more enjoyment in the off season because it's the management piece. I like having my hands on my team and being able to manipulate things and make trades and be an owner. I mean, that's why we play Dynasty. We like having that ownership feeling and building up the team how we want to. But yeah, to your point, there's so many nuances and so many variables to it, but that's what I love. And I think that's what makes engaging with other people so much fun. I can give you start-sit advice. I can give you roster construction advice, but having that opportunity to build a relationship with someone and really get to know their league and the format and the scoring, it takes time, but it's super rewarding for me.
And you say it takes time. I marvel at, I always wonder how I have 20 some odd leagues that I'm in. And I'm on a podcast with Coach Bruce every week, and I edit articles a few days a week in the morning. My point is that my level of time is probably a little better than yours. So as an analyst or as someone who's putting out a crap load of content, are you able to still enjoy the game as a manager? And how many leagues are we talking about if you are?
Yeah, I definitely am. I've gotten a lot better at saying no over the years, which is good. And this answer always kind of surprises people because they look at the amount of work that I do or the content that I put out and they just kind of assume I'm in dozens of leagues. I don't really play best ball. That's just never really been my thing. So I know a lot of people will say, well, I'm in 50 leagues, but they're all best ball. I just drafted all of them. I'm only in like 5. That's it. I'm in, I think, 3 dynasty leagues, a couple redraft leagues every year that I do, Scott Fishbowl when I have the opportunity, and that's pretty much it. So my exposure on players is pretty limited because I only have a handful of leagues, which is fine.
Right.
But I can really dedicate time to each of them. And I never really want to join a dynasty league if I can't dedicate the time, because that's why I like doing it, because I would feel bad or I would waste more sleep wanting to manage that team and put the time in to actually make it worthwhile. So it really isn't that many, but I definitely enjoy the aspect of it, even as someone who produces content. Yeah, for sure, it's still very enjoyable.
Good. Now let's get into some of these questions, because Coach Bruce has been able to have a dialogue with you on a few occasions that I've never had this opportunity. So T. Higgins and A.J. Brown, those are guys you were on from the start. And this kind of goes back to the process question I asked earlier, but what was about their profile that, you certainly didn't act like you had any doubt about either one of them?
Yeah, pretty fortunate on those guys to hit early, which was fun. I'm admittedly not a film guy at all, and I know there's always a raging debate on Twitter of film versus analytics, and that's it's fun to watch as a spectator. I tend to hedge more on the analytics side because that's where my comfort zone is. I absolutely know and respect that film has a place. It needs to have a place, a very predominant spot at the table. I don't have the eye for it, but also I've never really taken the time. So for me, it's not a knock on film, but if that was something that I wanted to really add to my repertoire personally, I would want to take the time to get decent at it. I would want to be able to take the time to know how to watch film, because I know it isn't just you flip on a YouTube video and you watch a player play. I've talked to and have heard and seen tweets from a lot of people that do film, and they say, you got to watch the same play like a dozen times. So you can watch every angle of every player, because those nuances matter. And I know they matter. I just don't know how to incorporate those into my process. So I focus on what I feel like I'm good at, and then I lean heavily on the opinions of those who I know do the film work and kind of incorporate that into my process. And I'm not ashamed to say that. Like I rely on other people's opinions heavily because I'm one guy with a full-time job and a family who only has 24 hours in the day. So I do what I can. I incorporate the opinions of others as best as I can into what I do. And sometimes I hit and a lot of times I don't. I guess the short version for both Brown and Higgins, I just loved watching them as a fan in college, and how they showed up on paper combined with what other experts told me they saw on film just really clicked. It really meshed well with guys that are alpha wide receivers. They play big, they play fast. They demand targets, they demand volume. Draft capital always helps. I mean, one of the tools that I use a lot over on RotoViz is called the Prospect Box Score Scout. And all it does is very simply just show box score stats, which I know is not even remotely what you should be using when scouting, is just looking at the numbers. But one thing that I like about it is it pulls up their college simulator or their college similar players, just their sims, whoever their comps are. And it incorporates draft position, reception yard market share, reception touchdown market share, receiving touchdowns and receptions per game market share, their 40 time, their weight, and then their draft capital. I mean, so it kind of just condenses all of this pretty relevant information, production, and some actual athletic ability. And it says, okay, who are similar players that have produced at the college level that have also gotten drafted? What do they look like? I looked down some of A.J. Brown's closest comps. They're not all great. Rarely are they ever all great. There's a lot of guys that show up that bust, and that's fine. I mean, for A.J. Brown, some of his closest comps are Laviska Shenault, Juju Smith-Schuster, Michael Thomas, T. Higgins, and actually Michael Pittman. So those are like 5 or 6 of the closest guys that he compared to even before setting foot on the football field. The furthest any of them got was being drafted. That's it. There's not a single NFL snap that goes into that. It's all college-based. Okay. So when I see those names pop up, then it's like, okay, there's some names that I can work with, at least give me a landing spot. Yeah, you can't ignore the busts. Cody Latimer, Laquan Treadwell, players like that. I mean, those show up for A.J. Brown as well. Guys that just didn't make it at the NFL level. And if I jump over to T. Higgins, some of his closest comps, again, Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins. Then he also has Laviska Shenault, Juju Smith-Schuster, Robert Woods, and A.J. Brown. So they comped to each other. But when I start to see these guys pop up, not just, he's a good role player, a good, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, a good professional wide receiver. No, these are like alpha dog wide receivers that can go out there and dominate a game. Like, that's what I like to see. When those things start to pop up, that's a good data point to start. That often kind of leads me down another path of, how do those players do in year 1 in the NFL? How do they do in year 2? Are you worried about landing spot, coaching situation, offensive coordinator? All of those things matter. But for me, this is often a really fun place to start, is to see who are similar players like them. It's not the end, like I said, but it's a really good place to start that does highlight and bring some really fun names to the surface.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such great information. I think that, so I'll give you an example. If we take a look at, so right now you've got a lot of people that are talking about, draft strategy and what that looks like. And you kind of covered that a little bit too. When you're talking about draft strategy and you're talking about late round, where do you prefer? And I use this because this came up at the expo. I don't think you were in the room when it came up. And I love to ask analysts this question. Where do you prefer to be in a draft? Do you prefer to be in the front end of the draft, the back end of the draft, or in the middle of the draft to avoid position runs? Like, what is the sweet spot for you in drafts, or does it even matter?
For me, it's usually top half. I like to be early. Like if we're talking redraft, for sure, I like being in the first 3. First 2 is even better for me, especially in a single quarterback league. You can get Christian McCaffrey, Delvin Cook, and then Alvin Kamara is pretty clearly my 3. Yeah. So I don't mind being anywhere there. I know some people may have, 1 and 2 are pretty consensus across the board, it looks like. I like going single elite running back for a lot of my builds. That's kind of a very RotoViz-esque way of building a roster, is going single elite running back, hammering wide receivers, grabbing a viable pass-catching running back, a backup running back, somebody like a Gus Edwards, a Nyheim Hines, a J.D. McKissick, depending on your format. I mean, guys that are going to give you a safe, predictable, maybe low-end output, but you're so strong everywhere else where it doesn't really matter who you're running back to, as long as you're getting something. So top half for me is generally where I like to be. But it's fun to be everywhere. It's, if you always get the top half of the draft, sometimes your drafts start to look very similar. But if you have maybe a back half of the draft, then you can maybe go, tight end, wide receiver, or something like that on the 1-2 turn, as opposed to kind of having to wait to come back for like the 2-3 turn on the other end.
Yeah. No, that's great, man.
I like being in the driver's seat as much as I can. I don't like having to hope things fall to me. I don't mind being on the corner. I don't mind being 101. I mean, if you go Christian McCaffrey, that's great. I mean, I'm actually in a redraft league right now as we speak. It's a slow draft. I drew the 101, and we're currently in the 6th. So from the 101, 12-team, 1 quarterback, I started Christian McCaffrey, then I went A.J. Brown, C.D. Lamb at the 2-3 turn, and then came back with T. Higgins, Chris Godwin at the 4-5. So I have 1 running back, 4 wide receivers. It's a deep starting lineup. It's 3 wide receiver, 3 flex. So, I mean, I can roll 6 wide receivers if I want, but being able to get 4 guys between Brown, Lamb, Higgins, and Godwin that could all finish top 15, mean, that's great. I love it. And I'll worry about my running back too, probably way later.
That's we talk about hero running back and zero
Yep.
running back and all the different draft strategies. And I think if you're just getting into fantasy football, a lot of that information can be confusing. So sometimes on Twitter, it's almost like analysts talking to analysts, and we're all trying to help each other become better players. But we're not necessarily speaking in a language that allows the new people to Twitter or people that have not done Dynasty before feel comfortable making that leap when you're playing for money.
Yep.
So people tend to gravitate to what they know best. And I think that's what separates great analysts from analysts that may be struggling to get an audience is getting those people to follow and understand it. And this is such a great conversation because this is that time of year where draft strategy is so important. Because I look at, if I'm looking at full PPR and I'm looking at being at the end of a draft, I love going 3 running backs and 4 wide receivers. But at the same time, that depends on how the board falls, right? Like if I can get a Travis Kelce somehow, not Travis Kelce. A lot of times I'm getting Darren Waller in the 3rd round, depending on what the point system is. So if I can go 2 big running backs I can get Austin Eckler and Antonio Gibson, at the turn, and come back and get a Darren Waller. That's tough for me to pass up. But if those top 3 tight ends are gone, I'm okay taking the 3rd running back. I might get a Josh Jacobs or David Montgomery or somebody in that range at 3, or Najee Harris, an early 2nd. So, but then there's times where, the board doesn't fall the way you want. So I get what you're saying, being at the front of the draft is you do get to have a little bit more control over at least who is my first player. It's pretty predictable. And your top 3 running backs are the same as mine. I've got McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, and the same top 3 that you do. But it's interesting to see how that draft unfolds. And my worst spot for me is in the middle. I get that you can get away from position runs, but I also feel like I'm caught in the middle. I'm like, who's going to be there, in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and of course, as you get into later rounds, man, it's probably the least favorite spot for me to be in. I'd rather be at the very end or at the very front and take my chances from there. Give me the top 3 or the bottom 3. I would agree. There you go.
Hey, I got a couple more questions before we let you go, and one of them is on. I read a bunch of your stuff recently, and one of them was the article about 3 running backs to go out and get. So obviously one of them was Travis. And what are the ramifications that you see coming off of that injury for him?
Great question.
Sorry, because I'm sure you're a little bit heartbroken.
This is a big topic right now.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. I wrote this article, what was the date? Early in July is when this article came out on running backs that I think you should buy high in Dynasty. And it's a direction of articles that I've tried to take every year. Everyone always looks at buy low. That's fine. But sometimes Dynasty managers are scared off that if they miss a player at their basement value, they're like out. They're just totally out. They're like, well, I missed him while he was cheap, and I'm just not going to get him now. Sometimes players that were cheap that are ascending, get them on their way up. That's fine. Like pay up for these players because they're still going to get better. So kind of my shameless plug was last year, before last season, I said, go out and buy Calvin Ridley. I know he had a phenomenal rookie season, scored 10 touchdowns, had an awesome sophomore season, was banged up by injuries a little bit. I said, go buy him. And everyone's like, well, he's really expensive. I'm like, Julio Jones is not going to play forever. That was not me predicting a trade, but that was me looking at good. Look, historically, this Falcons offense has passed a ton. They play like 10 games a year inside. They have a really, an okay division. Defense isn't great. He's going to eat. And last year, just obviously exploded. So if you paid up for him before last year, you paid a good amount. It was probably super cheap compared to what he's worth right now. Yeah. I mean, so that kind of feeling of just because you missed him at the basement doesn't mean you should just be out. Stop always looking for like the bargain bin guys. Don't be afraid to go buy good players because you need good players to help you win. We can't just rely solely on, on discount guys. But anyways, for Travis Etienne, obviously super frustrating. Not a doctor, not going to pretend to analyze how his injury is going to affect him moving forward. Based on what I've seen and what I've heard, because it happened so early, we haven't even gotten to week 1 yet, depending on how rehab goes and everything like that. I don't mind buying the dip if you have roster space for him. Yeah. I don't mind buying him to stash on IR if you have that ability to, because sometimes when these injury news, when these things happen in the now, we kind of automatically forget that we're playing Dynasty and we get very reactionary in the short term. Like we like playing long term, but like you're not going to have him this year, and that's okay. I mean, anybody that had Dalvin Cook when he had some early career injuries, if you've held him or bought him, he probably helped you win helped you win some leagues in the last few years. So if you can get him, great. If you have him, I'm holding. I'm probably not selling. I don't like selling injured players, especially when they're that young, because you just don't know. Now, if it's an older player, no one's probably going to buy him anyways.
Right.
I would probably be buying or holding. I probably wouldn't be trying to sell him unless someone really wants to pay a lot, but I don't know what you would actually get for him that would be worth you giving up the chance that this young, talented back comes back and still has a productive NFL career.
Yeah, it's tough, and we were talking about it earlier and how it affects other people in the offense. And Coach Bruce was talking about how Laviska might get a little more activity underneath and even in the backfield itself.
Yeah, Chenault has been the wide receiver that I prefer out of that wide receiver room anyways. I like Marvin Jones a lot. He's looked good. He's a very competent veteran wide receiver. I think he's going to be better for real football than he is for fantasy. I like DJ Chark. He had an awful rookie year and a phenomenal sophomore year. I think the real DJ Chark is somewhere in the middle. He's very athletically gifted, but I just don't believe in him as a player that much. But Chenault, maybe it's just because he's kind of the new shiny toy and he's that year 2 wide receiver that I really like. And he shows up in a lot of comps for guys like A.J. Brown and guys like T. Higgins. I mean, even Laviska Chenault's comps are pretty impressive, but he's someone who can be used a lot in a lot of different ways. I think the jury should still be way out on whether Urban Meyer is a competent NFL head coach. I question that more by the day, but we'll see. But he's a talented player, and you can manufacture touches for somebody like that to get him the ball. I think he's going to be great for Trevor Lawrence, and he's just going to be such a versatile piece of that offense that I think he's still the guy that I would prefer, and even more so now with no Travis Etienne.
Yeah, we were always that is one of the guys that we've been talking about since day one. He's someone that obviously a lot of people are raving about as far as the second-year wide receiver guys, and he just always kind of popped. You talk about not watching film or not being a big film guy, but even when you do just watch brief stuff of what he did at Colorado, he just always pops off the screen, and you just hope that they can get something going, because that offensive line didn't look that great Monday either, and you hope that there's going to be some help down the line for Trevor in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like you said, we don't know. Rookie quarterbacks have often struggled to support more than one, or if one, relevant fantasy football player at the wide receiver position. I know JJ Zacharyson did a really good study and some research on this earlier in the offseason, looking at the impact that rookie quarterbacks have on their pass catchers. And it's tough. I mean, I'm a big Darnell Mooney fan, but
yeah, me too.
Allen Robinson is the clear one. We'll see, who the quarterback obviously is, and if and when eventually it is Justin Fields. I don't know how highly he can support 2 wide receivers. Same thing with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, same thing with Elijah Moore playing with Zach Wilson. A lot of these young guys who I really like that I think can do well. I'm excited for them. I think you're going to be disappointed this year if you get too excited. But a lot of these young guys could probably be like, post-type sleepers come this time next year, where we'll look at these wide receivers and say, well, we were so excited last year and they disappointed. Yeah, but disappointed relative to our probably inflated expectations. And I saw a question that Coach Bruce had sent me about, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think he's a perfect example of somebody that we got too excited about last year.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's like a 3rd-round draft pick. Like, he's an easy 3rd-round draft pick. We'll see what his injury looks like. It doesn't sound like it's too bad. But he had 18 opportunities in a Kansas City Chiefs offense. Like, that's awesome. We know he's a great pass catcher. Some of the touchdown, luck didn't bounce his way. But from weeks 1 through 11 last year, he was the RB11. He was an RB1 for the first 11 weeks of the season. He was averaging over like 15 points a game. He was only like 10 points away from being a top 6 running back. Like, and why are we all mad about it? We've like way overreacted to a guy that we were drafting in the top half of the 1st round last year. And because he wasn't like the rookie year Saquon Barkley, everyone just kind of has gone too far the other way and has said, well, we don't want him. And everything that the Chiefs have done have said they want him to be their guy. Obviously, they brought in Jerick McKinnon, but Le'Veon Bell walked out. Damian Williams walked out. They revamped the offensive line. So, I mean, that offense is going to be good. So if you can give me a talented first-round draft pick running back with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, who's going to get 18 opportunities a game in the third round, absolutely.
I think it's one of the mistakes that we make as fantasy players is we get so caught up in instant gratification. It's like our society, doesn't matter what we're talking about. It's all about give me gratification today.
Right now.
As opposed to tomorrow. And the reality is if you're going to play Dynasty, you've got to make that mind switch and say, hey, I'm drafting players. Hey, I want to win every year. Like I hate the term rebuild. I don't feel like I'm ever in a rebuild mode. Like I'm constantly trying to win this year, but also understanding that if I can get additional draft picks next year and I can build my roster for the future, of course I'm going to take advantage of that. But it's understanding if I take a Clyde Edwards-Helaire, understanding the offensive scheme and what they run. When you have an offense like an Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, the Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, it's almost a perfect complement of I have a deep threat, I have a guy that can win over the middle, I have a guy that can win underneath, I have a guy that can win in the run game. I'm going to spread you out horizontally and create running lanes. When I do want to run the football, I know I've got a light box. And that's where I think people from a fantasy perspective have to understand. And this is not film versus analytics because I'm a firm believer in both. It's just the film is to basically, then you can take a look at the analytics and say, does it back up what I see on film?
Right. Yeah, right? That's why those mirror each other so well because you can use one to either enhance the other or to raise questions and say, on paper it looks good, what am I missing? Or on the field it looks great, but what boxes is he not checking? And that's such a good point to bring up.
I think you brought up a great point too, that there's people trying to get into fantasy football. That's a great thing to say. I love analytics. Like I'm a spreadsheet guy, I love it. But at the same time, I'm also a film guy just from being a coach. And I love breaking film down and grading players and teaching my players how to grade players and who they're going to be going up against on, a Friday night or a Saturday night. But at the same time, it's if you're not a film guy, find guys on Twitter that are great film guys. Eliminate the homework. Trust the guys that have done this for years and use their film work to justify what the analytics are telling you. And at the same way, if you're a film guy, find the analytics guys or the sites that you trust to make you a better fantasy player. And you have so many avenues. What you pay in to get information for fantasy football is so minimal in terms of what you invest every year. But also the free content. There's so much great information out there that stick to the people that you trust, stick to the strategies you believe in, trust your process, but don't be afraid to be open to learning other parts of it. I think that's a mistake a lot of fantasy players make is I'm so dead set on this one strategy to anything that it's outside of that, I'm not going to listen to or take it as serious. And I think the best players are always willing to listen to other analysts, listen to the devil's advocate point of view and look at it and say, okay, that makes sense. I can see where you're coming from. This is going to make me a better player. Maybe this helps me take a look at something different. What is some advice you would give to people that are brand new, whether it's redraft or dynasty? What are some things that you would tell somebody who's just getting started and they're going to spend money and buy into these leagues, whether it's best, and I'm not a big best ball guy either, but it's mostly because it's not legal in Arizona. I can't get on Underdog. I can't get on DraftKings. If it was, I'd be addicted to it. I'll tell you that right now. I would be on all the time, but I physically can't do it. So I'm redraft or dynasty, and I'm almost 99% dynasty now, where I was a redraft guy for 20 plus years up until the last few years. But what is some advice you would give somebody in terms of how do they find the right information and where can they find that at and what's that process look like to you?
Yeah, I mean,
honestly, hey, there's several sites I could plug, but RotoViz is by far. It just is, especially if you're into analytics. Now, it's a little bit tougher to learn how to navigate. I will say that. You got to play around with it. But use guys like Sam, use guys like Curtis, use guys that on RotoViz. Go follow them on Twitter and find out who the key players are in that space and ask questions, man. Those guys are great at responding. Get on a Zoom call and share your screen and let them walk you through it. Like, they'll do it.
That's
for sure.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, I appreciate the shout out. That's great. I don't have to do any of my paid promos here. This is awesome. But like you said, surround yourself with smart people, and that's easier said than done, especially if you're new in the space and you're not really sure who to follow. But don't be afraid to just open up the scope as wide as you can and ask people. Ask me, ask anybody. I'll definitely reply and help you out. who are good guys to follow. And for me, it's always been surround myself with people that are smarter than I am all the time.
Yeah.
Always. Like you never want to find yourself the smartest person in the room. You're in the wrong room. And I'm always very humbled when people ask me for my opinion and they value what I have to say. But for my own personal, consumption as my own, I consume a lot of content too. Like I create content, but I'm always reading and watching and listening to a lot of other content from people that I value and respect. How can you just take all of those different ideas, all of those different opinions, and just kind of layer them into your own process? Don't be afraid to not know something. I think so many people, when they start off in this space, they feel like, if they're trying to make it full time or do whatever, they have to have all the answers. They have to cater to everybody. They have to do, best ball and dynasty and redraft and Devy and all of those things. It's okay. Focus on dynasty, focus on redraft, focus on one thing, get good at that one thing, find a way to provide value. You don't have to be a one-stop shop right away. If you want to build yourself into being, good at all of those, that's great. But I have zero problem with someone who's been blessed to accrue a pretty large following and have opportunities to write for a good website and all the great things that I'm humbled to do. I have zero issue telling people, look, man, I have no idea. I will ask. I will point you in the direction of somebody that I think knows the answer better than I do, or I'll refer you to someone who I think has done research on that topic more than me. Like, that's okay. And I think sometimes people are scared to deflect because then it shows, well, I didn't know something. They're not going to come back and ask me. I mean, personally, I have a lot more respect asking somebody a question and they say, hey, that's awesome. I have an idea. Let's go ask somebody else, or let me direct you to somebody else who I think knows that. Being able to be okay not knowing, or being able to be okay still learning, I think that's great, because then you never really arrive. You're still always learning and growing, and that's a great thing in any industry, not just fantasy football.
Absolutely. You guys both brought it up earlier. Try and be the smartest. Try not to be the smartest guy in the room, even though, sorry, Sam, tonight you are the smartest guy in the room. No offense, Coach.
Hey, I'm with you.
But you want to. There's so many avenues. There's no reason for you not to find the ways to make yourself better. But man, I'll tell you what, Sam, we can do this all night long. I have plenty more questions, which just means we'll have you on again sometime down the road. But coming from me, man, I truly appreciate it, and I truly respect your grind. And thank you so much for coming on tonight, Sam.
Yeah, thank you guys both so much for the opportunity. I was really looking forward to this one tonight. I was looking forward to chatting with both of you guys. And if we want to do, find some night, some weekend where we're both free and do a longer stream to chat it up, that would be fun.
Hey, definitely. Be careful what you ask for. I promise you, we will take you up on that.
I know. I
think what's super neat about this is just the opportunity, and this is what we wanted the coach approach to be about. Brett and I will tell you, we're high school coaches. We played ball. I was fortunate to play at the college level, and I'm a bit, obviously, but at the same time, we're not analysts. We don't see each other as analysts at all. We see each other as guys that, I guess, are for the people. So the coach approach is really supposed to be about, we'll cover the latest news over the last week in the first 30 minutes. And the last 30 minutes is we get a chance to ask the analysts to make people better fantasy football players, regardless of whether you're super experienced, if you're into best ball, if you're into redraft, you're into dynasty. We want to bring content information to the masses and to the public that make them better fantasy football managers and players. So, man, I appreciate having you on, man. You're the first guy that I ever reached out to in this space, and it's been really cool, the friendship that you and I have created, and it was awesome getting a chance to meet you at the expo and talk to you one-on-one a little bit. So I appreciate you being on, man, and we'll definitely take you up and get you on and just really dive in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys both so much again, and reach out anytime, either of you and anybody listening. Always welcome to reach out on Twitter.
Great. Hey, thank you both. Coach Bruce, we'll see you next week.
All right, man. We'll talk to you guys soon.